Brian Southerly with Hixson. I lead our workplace business unit, and we're really glad to here. First of all, thanks to Greg for hosting this event and allowing us to use the space. I think you'll agree the views are just terrific. Thankfully, the sun's shining this morning. The fog will burn off in a little while. It'll be really great. So thank you, you guys. Secondly, I want to give you some insight if you've not been to one of these before. This is our third one in 4 years, this Thought Leadership Series event. We would like to do these every year, but the task of finding someone to do these is not easy. I wanted to give you a little insight into why it's important to us. Number one, we search all of the things that we go to and read to try to find the right person to bring to Cincinnati to talk to you, because we want to bring something that's important to you, hopefully, and we just don't want to bring anybody here. So we research that. We go talk to them. We ask them if they would like to come. Some people say Cincinnati is where. And then we go listen to them speak to make sure that you're going to enjoy hearing them. So Eleanor has met all those requirements, thankfully.
And I Googled Cincinnati.
So it's important to us, and we put a lot of time into finding the right people to be here. So hopefully we get to do this every year, and hopefully you'll come back when we do it again. So Eleanor is with Leesman Index. She's the managing director for North America. I saw them speak last year about this time and was really taken by the information that they provide. I'm sure in our data-laden world, you probably get dozens of things coming across your desk every week or at least every month that tell you this research study of so many people and so many people do this, and the studies say that, and usually it's 1,000 people or 1,400 people or 3,000 people. This is a study of 400,000 surveys. A little different animal than we're used to seeing, for sure. That was one of the things that intrigued us. I would like to read you something from their mission statement. We do one thing: measure how workplaces support those who use them. So now you've got data with people, which is another thing that really interests us. That's the business that we're about, is making the workplace work for the people occupied. Eleanor, not Eleanor, Eleanor. I'm sure you all read her bio. We found a lot of interesting things last night. She has a art consultancy background, an interior design background. She's been trained in MMA, so very interesting insight into the world. She's got a very broad perspective on the world, and we're really happy she's here. Thank you.
So first of all, I have to say is thanks very much for Brian for tracking us down and listening to us and inviting me to come here. I'm delighted to be in Cincinnati and to have met everybody that I met from Hixson last night. So please don't disclose all those personal secrets. So I'm used to walking around a great deal, and I'm a little bit European in my way of using my hands, but you might notice I'm a little bit caught up with a leg right now, so excuse me, but I'm going to still probably try and move around. Obviously, I was introduced, so I came on board in 2016. I'm not a native, as you can hear, but I've been in America for about 6 years, and I have a 5-year-old, so I have a very vested interest in workplace, in America, and culture as a whole. I set up the office in Manhattan, April 2016. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is every year we do at least 2 large research deep dives into our database, and we publish those. I'm going to be talking about a sort of high line on a number of the ones that we've already published, and because we've just published, but it's under embargo because the first event's going ahead today in Sydney, our newest data book, I'm going to give you a very sneak preview into that, but believe me, I only got the slides last night. So please don't drill me on those last slides, but very soon we'll be able to produce that data book, and I've promised Brian that I'm going to be able to get you guys copies as soon as I can. The event launches on the 2nd of October in New York, and we've got 6 roadshow going on. So we always produce events, and this is The data book that we're going to, or the book that we're going to be talking about a little bit more today, is the one that we just released a couple of months ago, where we took a sort of more micro view into our research and looked at our high performance workspaces. We call them our Leesman Plus. There's a few of these booklets floating around. I was somewhat impeded at carrying a great deal of weight on my way here yesterday, so grab them if you can, but otherwise they're all available online. So we're going to be looking at how the best beat the rest. So to give you an idea before we go into this research, and predominantly what I'm going to be doing is talking about this collective intelligence that we've gathered from all of our clients. But just before we get into that, to give you a little bit of scene setting, I don't know if you can all see these screens. I know I naturally tend to point at this one, sorry. We are completely independent, so that's the first and foremost important thing. It's something that our clients value a great deal. There's nobody else in the market providing the type of measure for employee experience or workplace effectiveness that we have without a vested interest in the results. So we have a completely consistent and robust data set that we've built over the last coming up 7 years, and we deliver the good, bad, and ugly. Think of us as the error diagnostics. I'm not going to, come in and say, hey, this is great, but we're not going to tell you about this bit which is not so great. We are going to deliver across the board the results. And ultimately, we've been, become known as the global measure of employee experience. So we're a business intelligence tool that allows strategic intervention into portfolios, be it from one building through to large estates. And one of our founding principles was this free dissemination of knowledge. So alongside our own events that we host twice a year in America, both in New York and then other cities, we get involved with limited amounts when they sound like great opportunities to come to new cities and meet new audiences. So I'm grateful for being here today. How we do it, it's really simple. It's one tool. It's a standardized tool that works at every level of the property life cycle and has multiple applications, whether that's a pre and post capital project, whether you're going through a change management program, whether you're looking at an annualized appraisal of an entire global portfolio. So before we get too far in, it's really simple. We build a survey link for you and it's distributed internally. That's how we get the information, okay? But we support in how we're going to go about that, what are your objectives, and work alongside you. So the how is we build that survey, tailor it to each organization through demographics, whether it's your departments, your job roles, your filters, etc. And then we come into what I call our backbone of our survey. These are the core questions that have remained unchanged. So this is where it gives us unparalleled benchmarking capabilities globally. At the very core of what we see as crucial in workplace and assessing how a workplace is fit for purpose is understanding, seems so obvious, what are people doing? What are the activities that they are actually doing in their working week? So we have 21 activities. We don't ask them to rank or rate. We ask them to tick if it's important to them, and then let us know how supported they are in their current role. So you may have seen just that slide where I showed the X-ray. Think of us as the radiographer of your workplace, but not the surgeons, okay? We're here to do an independent audit. We're going to find out what are they doing in their current workspace and how well supported are they in those roles that they're there to do. Alongside that, we then, here we go. We then obviously with any workplace audit want to go into the physical and service features. So we have 50 lines of inquiry that look at the features that are needed or the ones that are important to those employees and how supported or how satisfied they are with those features. We then have 10 questions which we call our impact questions. And throughout this data research presentation that I'm going to go into, I'm going to keep coming back to the activities and I'm going to keep coming back to those impact questions. And there's partly a reason for that, is that when we actually calculate and score our surveys, our clients' surveys, We actually only add together the scores from the activities and the impact questions. So the physical features and the service features really act as a sort of, I call it the Sherlock Holmes. Let's have a look at what may be impacting those activities, what's impacting that employee's sense of pride, productivity, etc., that are in those impact questions. Let's have a look at which service features, physical or service, that are impacting. So we have a 0 to 100 linear scale scoring system. So it's not a percentage, it is a linear scale. And that's our employee, think of that as our employee experience score. So 0 to 100 LMI, you're going to see the word LMI, short for Leesman Index, throughout the rest of the presentation. To give you a little idea of where we are, obviously I know Brian mentioned that we're over 400,000. We started off just by the end of 2010. I always joke that I have full respect for Tim Oldman, our CEO, to hit the market with a benchmarking tool and no data. So inevitably, as a startup, it takes a little bit of time. And as Brian, I think, last night challenged me, I actually cut the number of your respondents by the number of workplaces and got this number. You know, of course, there are a lot of smaller target populations in the earlier days, but we now have an enormous amount outweighing it on the other side as well. So the growth was a little slower until our first milestone in 2015, where we got the first 100,000 respondents. We've got a data book that you can download off our web that still has some really exciting and interesting content, where we first got our independent statisticians to dive into those numbers and see what the correlations that were happening. So do go onto our research and download those. From 2015, the speed of collection excelled, and we then added another 100,000 within the year. By the end of 2017, we'd got over 330,000 respondents in over 2,500 workplaces. And today, before 10 months is out, we've added well over another 100,000. So we're up at this was from a week ago or so. So we're up at over 420,000 respondents, 3,100 workplaces. So by far and wide, the largest data base of its kind, especially bearing in mind that we're completely independent. This has been consistent questions throughout. So again, those questions that we've been talking about today, and the ones that we're going to be looking at in terms of that collective intelligence for the research insights, are these core questions, the robust backbone that doesn't change. Where are we? Well, we started off in the UK. So, not surprising that there's a larger market share there. The Nordics were a really early adopter of workplace, so they came up and have quite a large sector. Europe, there again, sort of equal parts for those three territories. The bit that I'm most proud of, obviously, starting in April 2016, is the one that I've highlighted in the blue. So we're the fastest growing territory. We've got, obviously it's a very large territory as well, so delighted to come into a new area and start introducing Leesman. But yeah, well over 70,000, and some very large surveys open right now that are going to be adding considerably to that. Obviously large estates here, some larger buildings as well, and some much larger target populations. So some really interesting work happening here. Also over on Asia Pac, we're growing quite rapidly over there as well. So what we really want to do, so the logistics of it, any one of you can come up and ask me, how do we actually build the survey link? But that's it. We build the survey link and we distribute it internally. All of the rest around that and the support that we give, we can discuss at another point. I want to get into the research and the data and where it's going. And we kind of joke that we're the Mythbusters. So if anybody wants to ask me a question about the millennials, fine, but don't get me on a rant right now, okay? So there's a lot of information there that we're looking at to see if there's actually statistical correlations going on. What can we find that's actually going to inform all of us guys in the business of looking at how to create the best employee experience? And we output those. So I've talked a little bit. Here's one of the data books. It's a very small one compared to one of the normally ones, which is why it was quite apt for when my leg was like this. But if you go online, you can download. These were 2 of the last ones from last year. The next 250, I'm going to talk a little bit of some of the insights from that. That's when we went into the 250,000. The rise of activity-based working. I'm actually going to go a little bit into that one today as well, but all of these research papers can be downloaded for free on our website, and I'd encourage anybody interested in those to go ahead and do that. So is there anyone in the room, first of all, that knows what ABW stands for? A couple, 3. Okay, so it stands for activity-based working. Does that shed any more light? Does anybody feel that they are working in an activity-based way here? Okay. This might be an interesting intro for you. So in 2017, we were approached by IFMA and asked from Sweden, from the Nordics, and said, look, you know, ABW, activity-based working, in a nutshell, you know, nobody seems to even really know what the definition of ABW is. There's nothing on Wikipedia, or there wasn't until recently, that really defined it, and nobody knows, is it allocated, unallocated, what is it? Is it just a spread of spaces and you throw your people in there? And it's not. It's very much a completely new way of working, rather than having any sort of desk-based, people being based in one area or one office and utilizing perhaps a few meeting rooms. It's a total revolution of how you work, so that there's a variety of spaces designed for each activity that you do in the day. And this has been a strategy that's been adopted and then gone out of fashion in Europe. Now it's come back in the States. Here, I can tell you for sure you'll keep hearing of it. It will come under different guises. People will think that free addressing is ABW. They'll think unallocated is ABW. It's not. ABW is a very specific way of working when you really dig into what people are doing and provide design spaces and a variety of them to allow them to freely work around different spaces rather than being tethered in any one particular place. So they said to us, this is a huge strategy being rolled out for space reduction. Does it work? And of course, because we have no vested interest, we said, okay, well, we'll have a look into it. So we inserted some new mobility questions into our survey. And in 2017, or just around 12 months, we left the questions in, and we took over 75,000 respondents from 615 workplaces. Just under 40,000 of those were pre-occupancy, so essentially kind of, you know, projects that were about to be thrown away, so we excluded those from the study. We then got 23,500 post-occupancy, or what we'd call baseline standard projects that were not ABW. They did not qualify with any of our criteria, so we used those as our control group. And it left us with 11,366 that were ABW, activity-based working. They qualified with a list of criteria that we put out to say, this is really an ABW. This is a space where people are utilizing a great variety of different spaces, specifically designed for the activities that they're doing at that time. And it was in 40 workplaces. So that was the main focus of the study. So on first sight, looking at that aggregated LMI, that linear 0 to 100 employee experience score, when you're looking at a business case to justify the expenditure of changing to ABW, and is ABW going to be a successful space reduction or cost saving or whatever reason for implementing it that is the objective, on that score alone, to have an LMI increase of 1.3 really isn't going to score you that approval from your finance department. But we dug down a little bit deeper into this. And we had a mobility profile internal that's still within the questions today. We kept it in because it's so useful. Respondents select from one of 4 personas that describe the way they work. Now, for any of you eagle-eyed in here, you see that profile 1 is called campus squatters. Got us in a lot of trouble with the German unions. Okay. It was not in the questionnaire. It was not in the survey. It is our marketing department that has given these monikers to these different different categories. So please don't ask that we were, think we were asking people, are you really a campus squatter or a true transient? So profile 1, people selected if they performed most or all of their activities at a single work setting and rarely used others. 2 was the timid travelers who were beginning to use other locations. 3 is the performing most, so some of my activities at a single work setting, but often using other locations within the office. So they were really what we called our intrepid explorers. These are the guys that are beginning to become mobile around the office. And number 4, those that really were our transients. They were the guys that were using multiple spaces, up with a laptop, and rarely basing themselves in one location. So if we have a look at the aggregated LMI score, for those guys, their satisfaction, their overall employee experience score. The ones that selected the campus squatter, now bearing in mind these are guys that are sitting in ABW spaces, so they're supposed to be utilising other spaces, but these are the ones that are sitting predominantly at one desk. And their LMI score coming out at a pretty below average 59.6. If we go through, we see this continual uplift with the true transients at a substantially higher 71.9. So the business case for this methodology of working is beginning to become pretty strong when you start to see these numbers. If we take the productivity agreement, and I'm going to come back to those impact questions, do you agree or disagree that your workplace enables you to work productively? So just bear in mind, we're not asking, are you productive? That's not the question. We know that that's down to every single one of yourselves and your businesses to understand what that means. We're talking about the workplace and whether it's an enabler, whether it enables you to work productively. So in that productivity agreement, those that were campus squatters were sitting at a really disastrous 41.8%. Nobody's going to want to see that productivity score. However, most people are going to be a little bit more satisfied with 67.1, although it's still not particularly where you want to see it. And as we go further through, I'm going to show you where the high performance guys are getting to. But certainly still a case for improvement since from those that are sitting in a sedentary way. Pride agreement, even bigger. 85.9 for the true transients and 54.6 for those sitting at their desks. However, on those scores alone, you think, well, everybody should be going towards this strategy, right? This is phenomenal. There's clearly enormous benefit from having people work in a mobile way. However, when we looked at the adoption rates, we found that 30% were selecting campus squatters, 41% the timid travellers, 19% in those getting around a bit more, and only 10% in the true transients. So what was going on here was these incredibly disappointing adoption rates of this way of working. So, we're looking at that and saying, okay, were there questions we could have put in there that would have been able to further probe why this was happening? Why are these adoption rates? And we don't have the data behind one of our presumptions, which is, I think, that change management may play a very large role in this, in making people understand how to use the new environment. Certainly one of the pieces of advice our CEO often gives out, because we don't give advice, is if you're going to go for a major workplace change, then put some budget for your change management as much as you do for your design. But more than that, what we found is that you could have activity-based design, but if it didn't come together with activity-based behavior, then you did not get activity-based working. So in effect, a lot of those people were working at odds with their environment. They were seeing little or no benefit. But what we then, when we dug into that a little bit further, is we understood really, and coming back to those activities I said to you that were mission critical, understanding those people, you've got 21 activities, and we asked people to tick which ones are important and then let us know how supported they are in them. And those that had ticked 16, 17 upwards activities, I expect the majority of all you guys in the room, guys and girls, sorry, I know guys has become a genderless word these days. All of you guys and girls in the room basically are going to be working pretty complex lives. okay? You're going to have multiple responsibilities. And so you're probably going to be ticking most of those activities as something you do during a working week. So when we think about it in a really simple way, if you've got 16 to 21 different activities, one desk cannot support all of that. So it literally causes mobility. Complexity of your role creates mobility within the environment. So what we can see is the biggest driver of adoption of those true transients is when they have a complex role. We start to talk about activity matrix, activity complexity. This is what I'm going to be talking about further on. So to remember that that's one of those key drivers that we understand of how to create an effective workspace is understanding, first of all, what people do and how complex their roles are, because their needs for an environment are going to be far more than those that perhaps have lesser complex roles. So that's what we found there. The lower the complexity, it may or may not be of particular benefit to implement this sort of strategy. And those certainly that are trying to work in their old ways in a new environment that's, you know, let's take it to a bigger scale and allow it to become those open plan spaces or non-allocated spaces. If they're trying to hold on to their old ways of working, they're completely at odds. And this is where they need help perhaps for their behavior to come forward, perhaps with change management, communication, adoption at the highest level to understand how to utilize their new space. So we're going to go in now. We've looked a little bit at that ABW. I wanted you to see that from the point of view of talking about that activity complexity and how that can be a critical driver in workplace needs and high performance. We're going to now dive a little bit into what we see as the differences between our average and isolating our high performance. And the way we isolated the high performance was we created our benchmarks. We have two benchmarks. We have our global benchmark, which is our collective of all of the respondents, which is 420,000 plus. And then we have our benchmark, which is our high performance. It's what good looks like. And we call that our Leesman Plus. And our Leesman Plus is a very specific criteria. They're workplaces, not organizations. You don't get it just for the whole organization if you've only created one good one and the rest are stinkers. So basically, you have to have, our statisticians realized on that linear scale that 70 was a point at which it was quite hard to achieve past that. So that designated us as high as, and I know that you're smiling from GE because you're in here. Only one, but that's fine. So that linear scale, you've got 70 as that tipping point. So that's the threshold for coming into our high performance. To get a Leesman Plus certificate, you also have to have driven a good comms and strategy and support strategy to get the response rates. Because we have very strict criteria. So we work, for those of you that are the analysts or any statisticians in the room, 99% confidence level and 5% or less on the margin of error. So that's a really high criteria, but it means it gives us a very robust data set that we can trust is a relative important data set for those, and they have to have over 50 respondents to each of those. So it's actually a tough gig getting into this Leesman Plus crowd. And what we're doing for our last one, we've just this year published the first thing where we've had a dive into these offices or these workplaces that have achieved this criteria. There's a list. Not everybody discloses for themselves, who they are for their own personal reasons. And, here we go, GE. In the middle there. So those are who they are. I'm going to show you a little bit more. There are some of these, and again, they're available online. But we're going to look at what are the clues that give us, the differences between those global averages and these guys that are scoring these high performance scores. So another piece of publication we do on a quarterly basis that's free for you all if you want to subscribe to it. GDPR rules means you have to subscribe to it these days. So it's the Leesman Review. And in the back of that, we update on a quarterly basis something we call the impact code. So to give you a really quick review of how we read this, and I'm going to hobble this way a little bit. and I'm sorry, I know you guys are looking over here. In this row here, we've got the 21 activities that we know, which we talked about earlier. We've then in the first row got the global importance. So that's the percentage of people, of respondents that selected that activity as important to them. So if we take that top line first of all, 2.1 is individual focus work desk-based, and 92.8% of respondents, 420,000 odd respondents, said that was important to them. We then give you them how they feel it's supported, so just focus on that top line again, and out of that 92.8%, 76.1 agreed that that was supported. Okay? Now we're going to give you the high performance numbers. So, Leesman plus agreement, 86.2. So, average was 76.1. Leesman plus high performance, the agreement is 86.2. Don't worry, because I'm going to make this all really easy for you in a moment. I'm just showing you so that you can read it at other times. We give you the difference really simply, so you can see what the difference between the global average and the high performance is. And then to make it even more simple, we give you the ranking of where the biggest gaps are. Okay, so if I then reduce that down for the sake of looking at the top 5, then what we've got is almost, for what a lot of our clients say, is the harder things to justify on a cost sheet. We've got relaxing, taking a break, at number 1 biggest difference between the global average and the high performance. And I've had comments from clients where they're like, and that's the one biggest stinking red line through their report. And they've said, I can't say that to the CEO. You're going to say that people are slacking off. You know, I can't report that. And I said, well, if you don't, I will. So, you know, this isn't about slacking off. We all know about wellness. You know, we've done a partnership that will be released very shortly with the Well Building to do a module looking at the success of those projects versus the control group. We all know that sometimes it's more productive to step away from our desks and take a break to come back. So relaxing break, taking a break, the largest one there. Informal, unplanned meetings, another one. I was really excited to hear then that this space used to be private offices and is now a space with these phenomenal views that can be used not just by hosting clients and customers, by your employees. This is like kind of the informal kind of spaces which can support formal activities, right? We don't need to do a move, you know, room booking system. Okay, get the secretary assistants and do all the hell you can just walk in here, right? You can get a coffee, sit down, have a phenomenal view. Productivity. So informal, unplanned space meetings. This is what the high performances are getting right. Thinking, creative thinking. Hosting visitors, clients or customers. So, you know, not everybody agrees, but certainly sometimes the things that on a cost sheet are a little bit harder to put the money towards and justify the space. Video conferencing. I have a different theory about this one. This is one of the slides I was joking after dinner that I sat up too late putting some extra slides in. And just before I show you this is not my parents, okay? But video conferencing, I don't think it's about justification. I think it's about the commercialization of expectation. So we all generally, I'm an apple tart, have one of these, okay? This is old. I've actually got 2. But, you know, my daughter's 5. And in 2 clicks, she can get my mum in England on FaceTime for breakfast every morning, okay, before we go to school. Then I go to my computer, actually with the worst anxiety of anything is when I've got a conference call or a meeting or any kind of platform and I see Skype for Business come up or I see Blue Jeans come up and I think, oh God. So I have like backup platforms ready to send out new links if we can't get through. I'm so sick of people telling me, no, we can't hear you, you're on mute. And you're like, no, I'm not on mute. I get that, I'm not on mute. It's an audio problem. So we have this issue of what the experience we have in our everyday lives with the kind of tech that we have at home. And then we get into the office and we may as well have that right? I don't know if anybody else in the room agrees with me, but surely we've all had experiences of bad audio and video conferencing, right? So there's a lot to do with expectation, and the reason I put that slide in is that's what I also want to see you to think about when I give you some high altitude insights into the new research that we're bringing out. But to come back to the analysis for Leesman Plus, so by the end of 2017, we'd looked at over 2,500 workplaces. 813 of those were in 2017, so 32%. But out of those, only 24 actually got it into that Leesman Plus category. So Jerry, feel proud. And we're not about pretty pictures. These are the only pretty pictures you're going to see. We're not telling you to go out there and make spangly pretty offices. We're talking about fitness for purpose. Does this space support the employees in the roles that they're here to do? But there are a few pretty pictures, and for any of you that have been into New York in the last year or so, the top one there, one of my clients, Boston Consulting Group's new space at Hudson Yards. It's a phenomenal space, phenomenal views, and a great project. And the bottom one there is one I haven't visited yet, but over in Sydney, which is the Lend-Lease offices. So that's just two examples of the guys that have got into those Leesman Plus. So, you know, well worth a tour of Boston Consulting Group if you can get in there. But what we can see across that listing, and you can see it again in the booklet, is that there's absolutely no one sector or region or type that dominates. It's completely across the board. So when everybody's saying to me, oh, we've got to talk about regional bias, we've got to talk about sector bias, we've got to talk about cultural bias, I say, can we just focus on what the bigger picture and the more important bits are? There will be some differences of cultural bias, of course, but they're not as fundamental as understanding what your people do and how to support them in the roles that they're there. So essentially what we're saying, and one of the things Brian said he liked about us, is we're not here to give you, this is what you do. We're here to say, it's quite complex. You know, there's no secret sauce. There's no particular way of getting it completely right. But what we're beginning to be able to do, or are doing, and especially with the new research coming out next week, is finding patterns and strong correlations that can give you some guidance as to what some of those key drivers are for the high-performance workspace. As you just probably saw on that, actually, there was also that split between post-occupancy and other. So only 13, you know, it wasn't a full 24 locations of post-occupancy, which we would probably expect. So what does that mean? New is no guarantee. Okay, so what we regularly see, more than any client would ever want us to admit, to, is either a small shift in your LMI score once you've spent a large amount of money in a capital project, hopefully a larger shift, but sometimes a slide. And the slide can often be on that productivity agreement. It enables me to work productively. So I'll come back to that a little bit. But what it seems to be is that we're continuing to miss some of the hygiene factors that are fundamental in the infrastructure of high performance. And one of those is noise. So I'll come back to that a little bit as well. So how are these Leesman Plus locations creating this high performance? Now, one of the things with Leesman, by the way, is please feel free to just interrupt or stop me. If there's something that you actually kind of like, that didn't make sense, please shout out. So, you know, it makes me happy if you want to interrupt. If you're not, totally fine. So occupation strategies, we looked at them, allocated or shared. This is why I wanted to give you that ABW background at the beginning as well, having a think about how people move, how that activity complexity can drive mobility within the office. Let's have a look at where they're doing it with these high performance spaces. So what I had to add in last night was this slide. Okay? Because I don't know how many of you have been on this, like, social. I'm not great at social media, by the way. Don't follow me on Twitter. I don't tweet. But, you know, LinkedIn, everybody's on the bandwagon saying how bad open plan spaces are. But eventually the other day someone said, okay, so everybody said how bad they are. Can people start telling us what to do right? And you're like, thank God, because it's so easy to be critical, right? But what about being constructive? So, and the amount of times I get phone calls, even from some of my most calm clients, saying, you know, steam coming out my ears right now. Turn on the radio and listen to the Harvard business professor on the Boston radio, slating open plan, saying that we're like the factories of, you know, of old, and there's people like, you know, dragging their lunchbox from one unallocated desk to another, desperately trying to find a space. And we're saying, okay, well, let's have a look. And we've got tons more research on this if you want to dig in there. But the slide I put this in before was because in the highest performance spaces, okay, this one, 17,511 should add up to 24. Okay, 17, that bar, that large amount, out of those 24 workspaces have more than 75% of their employees in open plan spaces. A large amount of our highest performing spaces are largely open plan. So it completely knocks the whole premise that open plan is a complete disaster. The simple fact is there is good open plan design and there is bad open plan design. Same as there is good enclosed design and there is bad enclosed design. So trying to pick on one strategy and demonize it, we say throw that out. Okay, forget what the media is saying and start really trying to dig into what it is that you guys need for your own employees. So when we looked a little bit at then allocation, it actually surprised us, because these open plan spaces, also 2 out of the 24 had more than 75% basing themselves at a non-allocated space, which meant that the majority were allocated. So that made us think, okay, so are these high performance spaces the ones with just deeper pockets that are allowing the variety of space, the open plan, but they're also being able to allocate a desk? And this is something that we will say we're continuing to investigate as we go on. This is the end, you know, this is just into 218. So what we're asking all of our Leesman Plus people to do these days is that they submit more real estate information to us. We know what the square footage is, we know how many meeting rooms there are. This is a project in continuation that's going to be a phenomenal resource for really understanding what is driving those high performance spaces. But certainly we're seeing some of the indications here, which are themes that we're going to have a little look at, about the commonalities. One of the themes, or the 4 themes that we're going to go into, are focus, collaboration, discussion, and community. So I was looking at those drawings on the left-hand side last night and trying to figure out which one actually meant each of those, because I wasn't sure which one focus was. I'm not sure Rick, our designer, was having the best day that day. Anyway, this is one of the most, for me, fundamental findings from our 250,000 research. What we're calling again, we're going to give all of the workplaces in our database little monikers. We're going to give them those that had a excuse me, under LMI score of 60. Excuse me. We're going to call them our obstructors. And these are spaces that are neither supporting a collaborative activities or the individual activities. Is everyone swamped already, or are we okay? On the opposite corner, unsurprisingly, are those that are supporting both collaborative and individual tasks, okay? And they've scored over LMI of 70. So these are our high performance spaces. This is where everybody wants to be in our catalyst space. A little bit surprisingly for us, what we saw above the, in the top left-hand corner, is more obstructor spaces. And these were spaces that were supporting the collaborative, but not supporting the individual. And I'm not talking about old spaces. There's a beautiful, great big, spangly, expensive urban campus in New York City that we measured a while ago. And I have no idea how much money was spent on that. And it's beautiful. And the group spaces, everybody would photograph them and love them. You know, this is a designer's dream for putting together these collaborative spaces. But it seemed that it did it at the detriment of the individual. And so the scoring came back as an obstructor workplace. What we've got down in the far right-hand corner are what we call our enablers, supporting the individual, but not the collaborative. So what it actually means is that if we look at these obstructors that were neither supporting collaborative or individual, to make it up into this catalyst high performance, it had to come along the line of supporting the individual focused work. So statistically, we found that the biggest driver to the agreement that my workplace enables me to work productively was when the individual focused heads down work was supported. So essentially, if you were in an enabler space and you were supporting your individual tasks, that all your people that were doing their heads down focused work, and you went through and added on the collaborative, perhaps to meet new business objectives of getting people together, being a more dynamic, collision environment, there is evidence now in our database to say this is being overbaked and at the detriment of the individual. So it's a balanced structure to understand how you continue to support the individual in their focus work, but to add the collaborative, and that's how we get the catalyst space. So that essentially was one of the biggest findings, that globally, the biggest driver, the hygiene factor of work for everybody throughout all of those countries and throughout all those sectors was that 93% of employees with the key impact on that productivity agreement was on that focused work, supporting them in the focused work. And to give you the numbers on that, what we can see is if we're looking at individual focused work away from the desk, the global average 64.9, the Leesman Plus there in the middle averaged at an 82.4. So the support of people being able to focus away from their desk as well as at their desk, a 32.8% difference between the highest and the global average, with the highest one obviously achieving nearly 100%. Coming into collaborative, again, this is where these offices are excelling, but not at the detriment of the individual work. We're going to see collaborating on creative work, 64 LMI on the percentage of the global average, 80 on the Leesman Plus, and the highest one in our scoring database there at 96.7. So another huge gap between the global average and the Leesman Plus. This Leesman Plus is essentially where I encourage all our clients to be looking at in the benchmarking. This is what good looks like. This is what is achievable. And this is what we want to be aiming for, not the average. We don't want to be dwelling in the average, because enabler spaces are not going to suddenly excel into catalysts. They can slip into obstructors. So here, looking again at the focused work, collaborating on focused work, again 26% difference between the global average and the highest Leesman Plus scores, but even the average there plus 14.5% difference. So huge differences. Community, we talked about this a little bit last night. Ability to personalize my workstation is going to come up in our new research, because when everyone used to give it a bit of a chuckle and say, oh, people will get used to it, seems they're not. It seems that maybe it's a sense of belonging, and it's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We want to feel like we are belonging to something. So reaching for shared goals. Sense of community, global average, 58.5, 15% up on our average for our high performance, and the best performing space there achieving 90.9. So you can immediately start to sense where you want to be in your LMI scores with your workplace experience. Sense of community, just to continue with that before you start asking the questions about, was that a small space? Were they all together? Was it easy to do? Actually, the second and third highest agreement of sense of community was our respondents of 750 and 450. Now remember, if they're respondents of 750, then the target population was probably fairly large. So these are large workplaces still scoring extremely high on a sense of community. So that's not the prohibitor. Again, there's no secret source to it was understanding exactly what your people are doing. The lowest one, however, had the lowest score on accessibility of colleagues was 1,400 employees in a predominantly open space. So open plan space doesn't necessarily say that you're going to have accessibility of colleagues. And in fact, going back to that little moment I said about the millennials, we find that a load of tosh. The millennials don't focus on one particular age group, because why would you, when there's all the other age groups, and half the guys that are much older have got much more complex roles. We find that there's only 2 places in the entire structure that they place more importance on: learning from others, which makes some sense when you're coming into a company and you're younger, and relaxing, taking a break. So the learning from others, we often see a hit on that score with the younger generation in open plan, perhaps because when there was allocated, you knew who to ask, you got used to that person being there. When it becomes open plan and unallocated, that's that element perhaps of fear of who do you get up and go and talk to. So, and again, we're also looking at how vertical distribution can impact onto community as well. So the impact, ultimately, all of those things, what does it have on the impact? And this is where we talk, we talk continually about workplace as a business tool. We're talking about how we can look at it as a strategic intervention to increase engagement, increase attraction, increase retention of employees. And that, that employee experience now very much at everybody's height of their awareness within the HR communities and all of every stakeholder within the organization. And this is predominantly why, when people are seeing these figures, my workplace enables me to work productively. Leesman average, 58.8, 15.7% higher in our high performance spaces. And in the highest one of scoring last year, a 92.5% agreement that workplace enabled them to work productively. So you can know for sure where the CEOs are going to want their staff figures to come out, right? Sense of community, 58.5, rising 15% on the average, and right up to 32.4% higher between the average and the highest one. And pride, pride, bring the guests to. Again, very low on the average, 52%, 29.2% higher in that high performance space. That's a huge difference. And then those with the highest scores coming in at 95.4. So are there any key ingredients to this? Again, I would ask you all to sort of, start familiarizing yourself with that impact code. It's really useful to see where those bigger differences between the global averages and those high performances. You're going to be able to see where in some areas, for example, planned meetings, it's a really, really important factor for everybody. But actually, the difference between those getting it wrong and right isn't that large. It's quite a, I'm not going to say it's an easy thing to get right, but it's apparently not a large range of difference. Whereas some of the others have huge ranges of difference, like we saw in that informal, unplanned meetings, relaxing, taking a break. These are the ones where strategically they can make a huge difference on that lever of employee experience. So this is where I'm going to take you into the last sum up of these Leesman Plus, and then into this embargoed zone where I'm not supposed to be showing you the new research, but I'm going to. So where did the best beat the rest? These were the top areas, the top features that we saw as the largest differentials. Atriums, communal areas, informal workout areas and breakout zones, variety of different types of workspace. We continually see that all the time, variety of different types of workspace. If someone's got a complex role, they get up from their desk to move around, and there's no space to go to. And when we're looking at, relaxing, taking a break, informal work areas, the amount of times I've seen people sort of try to stick a table and 3 chairs in a bit of space that was a bit useless and say, oh, well, here, people can come and relax and take a break. Really? Would you do that at home? It's not a very relaxing, taking a break kind of space. So general decor, very important, and quiet rooms for working alone in pairs. But these are quite extraordinary, and this is why I want to come back to that noise as a hygiene factor. You can see there, the Leesman Plus high performance, this is the high performance scores. These have beat all of the global average, all the other locations in scoring, and those are the 6th and 7th biggest differences. And look at how low the scores is. Noise level with the high performance has still only got a satisfaction of 41.7%. And below that, temperature control, 39.7%. And those are the highest scores. So this is, for me, where I think the power of what we do in the benchmarking is just so incredibly useful in contextualizing where you can put strategic intervention, where you're in good company, essentially. So I'm not saying that everyone should ignore a disastrous noise level score when you get it back, which you probably will. Most of you do. Most people do. 41.7 is not a good score. It's a global problem. It's a global productivity killer within the workplace, and it's a global call to say, how can we improve it? However, when you do see it in context of your own results next to these sets of benchmarking, at least it allows you to focus perhaps on what can we do in other areas that are going to significantly increase that employee experience and that fitness for purpose. Again, I'm not saying don't concentrate on noise levels, but I am at least saying that you can contextualize yourselves within what has been achievable in over 3,000 other locations. Temperature control. Again, variety, we see both of those elevated where people have choice. If they can move around, they can move from their desks. We can see an elevation in that satisfaction with noise and with temperature control, because at least they can move into spaces that suit them a little bit better. The next set of research is going to go much deeper into some of these areas. And certainly, I'd always question when you're looking at something like noise levels is to not immediately expect that that means loud. Because if I do this, it doesn't really worry you. But if I suddenly snuck up behind one of you and did that behind you, that's your animalistic fight or flight. So noises coming from behind, for example, are going to be far more disruptive than the ones in front. I like peace and quiet to work, whereas Dr. Peggy Roth, our research head, who's Miss Analyst and data, she just wants to work in the cafe with noise all around her, even though she's putting together these research papers. We're all different beasts, and we all need different sort of temperatures or, different noises. So noise doesn't necessarily always mean loud. It's talking about how disruptive a space is if it doesn't find a space that's suitable for the way you want to work. And the same with temperature control to some extent. So I think I've got a little bit more time, but this is where I'm now into completely new territory. The data book, which is called The Workplace Experience Revolution, is not available yet. I got the copy a couple of days ago and was joking with Brian that I really wanted to bring my printed out one, which I highlighted all over the place and found extremely exciting. And I'm not really supposed to be putting this deck in because we're supposed to launch officially on the 2nd of October in New York. But it was too exciting not to slide some of these in. And it's a very high altitude sort of look at what's going on, so that when I can release this document to you, it gives you some idea of what we're going into.
Before you get into this, 2 questions. I don't think they're connected, but they might be. How did you address the work at home push? And when an employee should or can or might work at home versus productivity in a company involved space?
Yeah, good question. So we address it in 2 different ways. We have internal and external mobility section within our survey. The internal mobility I showed you in the ABW when we were asking about whether you're sat at a desk or as a true transient. We also have an external, where we're asking people to select the way they work, whether they're predominantly coming into the office or whether they're actually predominantly out and coming in. So there's another 4 personas there, so we can understand their working persona. The only one slider question on time that we have in there is to understand whether what percentage of time people are coming into the office or working from home. If they do select that they're not always in the office, they then get a question that asks them about their homework setting. Now, the homework setting really just asks them in what situation. Are you in a dedicated office? Are you in a space that's within a main room but a dedicated desk within a main room? Or are you kind of at your kitchen table? So we can't benchmark the experience of people working from home. What we do is give our clients insight as if they are working from home, how are they working, in what kind of context. It can inform a little on that home working policy, but it does give people, some idea of the amount of time and whether that relates to what they're seeing in their utilisation or their badge in, badge out people. But we're there to measure the workplace, not the home experience. So we can only really report back on people's experience of their workplace.
Does the data offer insight to whether the corporate provided space is better?
We're assessing as
Right.
opposed to the home. There's too many factors, I would say, going on outside of that corporate workplace for us to determine whether they're having a better experience at home or not. We're not able to benchmark at home experience. We're only going to be able to benchmark the experience of the corporate. But clearly, if people are saying 100% are coming into the corporate and they're scoring very low LMI scores, that's the focus of where we want to be looking at.
Second question is, does the data, or is it possible, or is it necessary to evaluate the type of contributor? So you certainly go from a call center employee as a function, answering phones with the screen, going through a script, versus we found earlier an architectural company that may be doing something creative. The workspace doesn't seem to be logically the same for both of those.
No.
I don't know where your data helps sort that through, that if you got a primarily, a customer-focused call center operation, up and down lifting, individual contributor, very important. But
Yeah.
how do you get the right workspace compared to the scientific biological studies breaking the new cancer study?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, when we set up a survey and we build that survey, we have a simple setup form that is populated by our clients to give us the information we need on the demographics. So that's going to give us, the target population, the department lists, and that's where some clients will stay very high altitude with a simple department list. Others will go very granular. We'll be cascading secondary, tertiary to understand those departments. Again, with job roles, we can put in floors. So there's many different demographic filters that we can utilize to look at that satisfaction or those LMI scores through those different groups. We've got time with organization, age, gender, so full-time, part-time. So, there's a huge demographic setup that acts as all those filters to these core benchmarking questions. So coming back to that, do we know if they're call centers? Yeah, most of the time with my clients, I'll know which ones are call centers or whether they're predominantly coders. But I think the important thing there is even if you've got a workplace that's predominantly coders, you've also got management in there that have got completely different needs. So if I can't visit every workplace, obviously, that I survey, but I can almost immediately, when I see a output report now, from looking at the activity complexity particularly, so that one I was talking about earlier is what we do is give an activity complexity score as an average for each location, and then we can dive down further to that to have a look at what that means for each department. So I can guarantee you, for example, that if a location came out, if I was surveying Morgan Stanley or Johnson & Johnson or Standard Chartered Bank, where we're doing annualized appraisals of, they can say, oh, well, I can pick out which ones are our call centers and which ones are our coders just by looking at that one activity complexity score that you've given us. Because if it's low, it means that the majority have got much, I'm not going to say simpler, that's not fair on them, but a lesser range of activities to complete within the day than if they are a wealth management investment crew or sales crews or yourselves, who may well have 16 to 21 different activities that you're juggling in a week. So that activity complexity is a real indicator of the complexity of the space needs that you're going to need for those environments. And to give you an example of those call centers, what I often see with call centers is, well, for a start, that's a classic example of why activity-based working, what would be the point of implementing that with people who actually have to be statically at their desks? And they're suddenly being told, oh, move around. Well, you can't move around. So, this is where we're saying understand exactly what your people are doing and give the strategy that's appropriate to their activity complexity, if you like, to their roles. Because a call center, what I often see with the coders or call centers, is one big red line of data which says relaxing, taking a break, and tea, coffee, and other refreshments. They may well be very satisfied with the majority of what they've got there, but then they don't have somewhere to just step away and get away and have a sort of refresh space. Or natural light's a problem if they've been all centralized in a core and they're not able to actually. So their needs in terms of variety of space tends to be a lot simpler than the more complex ones. So again, it's coming back to that crucial understanding the activities, understanding what people are doing. We can filter on all different lines to dive down from a very high altitude aggregated look at how that building's performing down to what's the activity complexity for department X, and understand what their needs are going to be and how satisfied they are with their current environment to then inform the next iteration. Is that?
I think so. It's going to be interesting to see how the data and then how in real life, if you have a major capital expenditure plan, how you use that data to impact the design and the defense of the capital dollars.
Sure, of course.
And that's at the end of the day, that's what we're all doing here, is we need to get dollars from the C-suite, and we need to be able to show that this is better than just the airplane model of office. Everybody sits like on an airplane, and that's the most efficient, the CFO. The
transatlantic ones might be, the domestic ones are hell. Sorry. I think that we're going to be able to answer a lot of those questions for you in this. Again, we're one tool in a whole tool belt. It's an incredibly complex organism, workplace, and there's so many different factors that are going to come in to influence what the experience is of it. What our data is really looking at, and on such a robust level, is can we find any of those connectors, any of those patterns that can kind of give you that initial framework to say, okay, there's a whole load of complex stuff you've got to deal with, but we know from over 420,000 odd respondents that if you don't get these bits right, then those are some of the hygiene factors for building the rest of the workplace case. And I think, as we go into this little section of work, we're going to be talking more and more about the keywords that the industry are talking about is employee experience, and that how it affects that attraction, that war for talent. How do we retain? How do we engage? And that's where we're going with this latest part of research, to dig down further into how we support you guys in the strategies coming forth in an unprecedented new era of experience economy. So this is by far and wide the biggest piece of research that we've done so far. I have only had 24 hours on a very large document, so please don't grill me too much on this one. But hopefully you're absolutely welcome to come to New York on the 2nd of October. Any of you would be, if we've got any spaces left. Otherwise, I'll try and get here again and take you through this one in more detail. But to give you some insight here, we're looking at what are the key drivers of that experience. So when we're talking about workplace revolution, we're really looking at this period of time where we all know we're in an unprecedented time of change, and we were essentially in the middle of like the equivalent of the Industrial Revolution. I joked about this earlier and about our experience, and it is all very personal, our experience. Like, I've got this phone and I'm totally happy with it, and then suddenly Brian has the new iPhone, and my phone hasn't changed, but my experience with it has changed because he's got the new one. So it's the same as if, you've got an office we were talking about earlier, and the change of perception and experience all the way along is something that we're going to have to do. We're doing at a faster and faster speed. We may have been promised the corner office with that view of the bridge, right? Suddenly you're told, nope, you've got a quarter of that size around there. Now this guy's brilliant because he adapted to it and saw the bigger picture, but there's a lot of people that are resisting that kind of change, okay? So we're seeing this change at an unprecedented level. How many of you have got Sonos? Just one, amazing. How many of you got Apple? Right, okay. So there's a classic story about how, not Vodafone, sorry, what's Nokia had completely outdone this beautiful store in Manhattan. It was extraordinarily high tech. Everybody's got the doors open, the product's good, the space looks phenomenal, and there's no one there. And down the road, there's a queue wrapping the block, waiting for the doorman to open the store to the Apple store. And this is what we're talking about. This is the experience economy. They got it right. GoPro, I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's a surfer who wanted to, let people really experience the waves around the world rather than it being in a sort of blog fashion. This guy does this. Everybody knows Uber. Strava's the connecting everybody together, the athletes. This is all, and WeWork. I'm sure you're all aware of the, the desire to dominate the world with WeWorks, WeLives, WeSchools, everything. So this is what we're looking at. We're looking at a change that is unprecedented into this immersive participatory on the side of the user. We're all engaged, the Ubers, the Waze, the GoPros, all of these things we're involved with it. We're not just a consumer of it, we're actively participating in it to build it. And this has been, what we're seeing is one of the biggest influences on experience. So simply, if I was to put it, which one do you prefer? It's your choice, okay? So our expectations, obviously, as we come into this workplace, and it's a self-reporting survey, then it is by definition subjective, and it is going to change regularly. So if one floor, for example, is refitted, has the other floor changed? Yes, because of their experience of reflection of looking at what's happened to their colleagues' floor. So it is that reality at that point in time. We can't bubble wrap this up in any other way other than to say we are recording that perception of an employee's experience at that point in time. But our methodology is, does an employee's overall workplace experience follow any pattern? And the second question, which activities and features drive responses to each of these experience clusters? Now again, this is a big research body and it's fascinating, and we're going to go into it, in a couple of weeks in much more detail. This is just a snippet. 5 minutes, good. So just reminding you of those questions, we're going to focus in on those impact questions. What drives that employee sentiment? And does it follow any patterns? And if so, what are the drivers that influence those sentiments? Now, there's 10 questions. These are the 10 impact questions here. You can see individual productivity, collective productivity, sharing ideas and knowledge, an environable environment to work in, contributing to a sense of community, corporate image, positive impact on the environmental sustainability, pride, culture, and the design. And we gave this to independent statisticians. This is the 420,000 odd respondents. And what we've found is that there are 3 distinct clusters. It comes into what we've said is doing, workplace supports getting things done, seeing, so image and sustainability, so the corporate image, the environmental sustainability, and feeling, which is pride and culture. So that's the pride to bring visitors to your workplace, and the positive impact on workplace culture. So to sum up really in these last few minutes, and to give you some of those roadmaps into how do we create these strategies, out of those 420,000, these sentiments that we're seeing that do continually come up, is these are the activities. So coming back to that, what are the most important activities? Well, what we're seeing in the 420,000 is that to have a positive impact on those seeing, doing, feeling, these are the continual drivers that we're seeing. Individual focus work, desk-based, learning from others, so that sense of belonging, community, relaxing, taking a break, thinking creative thinking, plan meetings, and then up there into the collaborating on focus work, social interaction, and unplanned. When we bring in the seeing ones, again, those first 5 staying the same, and then adding hosting clients, visitors, and customers, which makes sense, but also individual focus work away from the desk. So perhaps that's about a trust culture, you know, knowing that people don't mind if you are free to work and move around. You've got a culture that you know, allows people to control their space and time a little bit more. And feeling, again, those same 5 coming up, and continuing up there. So I've highlighted for the sense of time those first 5, and those are what we're seeing as essentially the sort of super drivers of that sentiment, that employee experience. Get these guys right, and these are connecting people's positivity into those doing, seeing, and feeling. To take you quickly into the features, and I can provide you with this deck so nobody has to like panic and write them all down, is what we can see there is general tidiness. We talked a little bit about that earlier. The toilets and VCs, one of my favorite topics in America, is I have no idea why there's half doors. I don't get it. Like what's that? Like, it really changed from school or something? Anyway, and tea, coffee, and other refreshments. Okay, so think about that experience thing. You know, do you want your guys to have to go out and get the barista and pay for that coffee with a nice little bit at the top, or are you just going to provide the sort of stale jug? Hospitality, reception areas, general cleanliness, etc. If I come into the physical features on the other side, no surprise there that the workplace impact, noise levels, general decor, good news for you guys, because this is definitely a huge driver of experience. And then we've got desk, meeting rooms, small informal workout areas. So if I bring you to summarize that one, in total, we've got 13 what we're calling the super drivers, the sentiment super drivers. So these are the ones that we are seeing consistently throughout that 400,000 plus as connected to an employee's positive experience of the workplace. So that's what we're doing. We're challenging all of those industry preferences. We're challenging those popular myths. And the little final slide that I like is this one. We all know that these different stakeholders have been playing with these buttons for a while. You know, whether it's real estate, FM, HR, IT, they've been twiddling with the density, trying to dial the cost down, trying to dial the utilization up. And we're saying, hang on a minute, there's a big button up at the top there. And what is that button? It's experience. And that's the experience of your most expensive asset. So at what cost, at twiddling on these buttons, does it have as the impact onto that experience? And what we're seeing in our new research, which you guys will be able to all have access to shortly, is the outstanding workplace experience is one that supports these experiences of feeling, doing, and seeing. And we all know it's a complex place, but some of these are mission critical and can hopefully give you all some help and some road mapping into how to create a highly effective workplace experience. Thank you.